Did you know the Roman Empire didn't collapse in a single moment? There was no final battle that ended everything, no single invasion that brought the empire to its knees, no dramatic day when Rome simply fell apart. Instead, Rome collapsed slowly, quietly, so gradually that most of the people living through it never realized they were watching the end of their world. And here's the unsettling part. The collapse didn't feel like a catastrophe. It didn't feel like the end of civilization. It felt normal. People still woke up at dawn. They still opened their shops. They still argued in marketplaces. They still complained about taxes and politics. They still planned for the future. And that is exactly why Rome collapsed. Because the most dangerous declines in history are not loud. They don't announce themselves. They don't feel dramatic while they're happening. They feel ordinary. Most history books tell us Rome fell in the year 476 AD, when the last emperor of the Western Roman Empire was removed from power. It's a clean date, it fits neatly on a timeline, and it creates the illusion that Rome collapsed suddenly. But by the time that emperor disappeared, Rome was already hollow. The economy barely functioned. The army was unreliable. Political authority had lost all meaning. What we call the fall of Rome wasn't the cause of collapse. It was the final administrative update to a system that had already stopped working. To understand how Rome really collapsed, we need to return to the moment when Rome looked unstoppable. At its height, the Roman Empire controlled more land, more wealth, and more people than any civilization the ancient world had ever known. More than 1/4 of the world's population lived under Roman rule. There were paved roads stretching thousands of miles across continents. Cities with running water, sewage systems, public baths, libraries, and marketplaces. A legal structure so advanced that parts of it still influence modern law today. Rome didn't just feel powerful, it felt permanent. Most Romans believed the empire would last forever because it always had. And that belief, that sense of inevitability, became one of its most dangerous weaknesses. Rome was built on one core assumption, that tomorrow would always be bigger than today. Every new conquest brought fresh wealth, new slaves to work the land, new taxes to fund the government, new territory to reward loyal soldiers. As long as Rome expanded, its internal problems stayed hidden beneath success. Corruption existed, but it didn't matter. Inequality grew, but it didn't matter. Political instability was constant, but it didn't matter. There was always more money coming in. But no empire can expand forever. Eventually, Rome reached the limits of what it could realistically control. There were no more wealthy provinces left to conquer. No more easy victories. No more massive spoils of war to keep the system alive. And when expansion stopped, Rome didn't adapt. It turned inward. Rome's economy relied heavily on slave labor. At first, this made Rome incredibly wealthy. But over time, it destroyed something essential to long-term stability. The middle class, free Roman farmers couldn't compete with massive estates worked by tens of thousands of slaves. Small landowners lost their farms. They lost their independence. They lost their future. Many abandoned the countryside and moved into cities, hoping for opportunity that no longer existed. Urban populations exploded. Housing became overcrowded. Wages collapsed. Poverty became permanent. Crowded cities became breeding grounds for crime, unrest, and disease. At the same time, the cost of maintaining the empire continued to rise. A massive standing army had to be paid. A growing bureaucracy had to be funded. Roads, aqueducts, fortifications, and public buildings all required constant maintenance. The government needed more money, but the economy could no longer produce it. So Roman emperors made a decision that would quietly poison the empire from within. They debased the currency. Silver coins were slowly mixed with cheaper metals. The coins looked the same, but they were worth less. Prices rose, savings disappeared. People noticed something was wrong, but they couldn't explain it. They blamed merchants, they blamed foreigners, they blamed each other. Eventually, people stopped trusting Roman money altogether. Trade slowed, barter returned, tax collection collapsed. When people lose faith in money, they lose faith in the system behind it. And once that happens, authority begins to dissolve. Life in the empire began to change in subtle ways. Roads weren't repaired as often. Public buildings fell into disrepair. Local officials became harder to reach. Services that once felt guaranteed slowly disappeared. But none of this happened all at once. It happened gradually, year after year, generation after generation. Rome was also being weakened by something far less visible, but just as deadly: disease. Repeated plagues swept through the empire, killing millions. Entire towns were emptied, workforces vanished, tax bases collapsed overnight. Each plague made it harder to recover from the last one, and yet life continued. Markets reopened, taxes were still demanded, soldiers were still needed. The system kept moving forward, even as its foundations eroded. Here's something most people are never taught. Rome almost collapsed 200 years earlier. Between the years 235 and 284 AD, the empire entered a period known as the crisis of the 3rd century. In just 50 years, more than 20 emperors ruled Rome. Most were assassinated. Several were executed by their own soldiers. Others were overthrown after only a few months in power. The army no longer protected the state existed to pay the army. Generals fought each other instead of foreign enemies. Civil wars drained the treasury, borders were left undefended. Rome wasn't being conquered from the outside, it was tearing itself apart from within. Earlier in its history, Roman soldiers fought for land, honor, and citizenship. Military service was a source of pride. But centuries later, Roman citizens avoided enlistment. Service was dangerous, pay was unreliable, and loyalty to the state felt meaningless. So Rome turned to a dangerous solution. It outsourced its defense. Foreign mercenaries increasingly filled the ranks of the Roman army. Entire legions were composed of men who didn't speak Latin, didn't follow Roman customs, and didn't feel Roman. They fought for money, not identity. And when the money stopped coming, so did their loyalty. Rome also suffered from a problem few people think about: administrative decay. Local officials became corrupt. Tax collectors took more than they were owed. Governors enriched themselves while cities crumbled. People stopped trusting authority at every level. Why obey laws that weren't enforced? Why pay taxes that didn't improve your life? Why defend a system that gave nothing back? Popular history often blames barbarian invasions for Rome's collapse. But that explanation misses the deeper truth. Most of these groups didn't want to destroy Rome. They wanted food, land, security. They wanted to live inside the empire, not burn it down. They were fleeing famine, climate pressure, and the advance of the Huns. Rome allowed them across its borders, then exploited them. Corrupt officials withheld food, sold supplies at extortion prices, turned refugees into enemies. Desperation turned into rebellion. When the city of Rome was sacked in 410 AD, the ancient world was shocked. But by then, Rome was no longer the true center of power. It was a symbol of a past that no longer existed. One emperor understood this better than most. His name was Diocletian. He realized the empire was too large, too complex, and too unstable to be ruled as it always had been. So he made a radical decision. He divided the empire in two: East and West, two capitals, two emperors. The Eastern Empire was wealthy, urbanized, and defensible. The Western Empire was poor, rural, and overstretched. One survived, the other slowly faded. Here's the part that surprises most people: Rome didn't truly disappear. The eastern half of the empire survived for nearly 1,000 more years. We call it the Byzantine Empire. They called themselves Romans. Rome didn't collapse in a single moment. It changed shape. Many people blame Christianity for Rome's fall. That explanation is too simple. But it did change something important. When Emperor Constantine the Great legalized Christianity, loyalty slowly shifted. From empire to eternity, civic duty weakened. Military service lost meaning. The state stopped feeling sacred. Rome didn't fall because people believed in God. It fell because people stopped believing in Rome. By the 5th century, roads went unrepaired. Cities shrank, literacy declined, public buildings crumbled. Local elites stopped investing in the future. Why build something you don't believe will last? When the final emperor was removed in 476 AD, most people barely noticed. Life continued, just smaller, poorer, and more fragmented. No great moment, no final scream, just silence. Rome teaches us something deeply uncomfortable. Civilizations don't collapse suddenly. They normalize decline. People adapt. Standards lower. Warnings are ignored. Until one day there is nothing left to save. So here is the question history leaves us with. If you were living in Rome during its collapse, would you have known? Or would everything have felt normal? If you enjoy uncovering the hidden patterns of history, the stories beneath the surface that most people never hear, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and watch the next one. Because history doesn't repeat itself, it rhymes.